This is episode 4 of the History Below the Pines Storytellers Collection, The Price of Gold.
48.50.
To a stranger, it's just a number. But to a homestake miner, it was a destination. It's nearly a mile of vertical rock, a dark, pressurized world where the temperature is always rising and the earth itself seems to breathe against you. You're standing in a steel cage, shoulder to shoulder, with the men who know your heartbeat as well as their own. The gate slams, the light of the Black Hills vanishes, and as you drop into the belly of the mountain, you aren't thinking about the 41 million ounces of gold this mine will eventually produce. You are thinking about the man next to you, the stability of the stope, and the shift ahead. The homestake wasn't just a mine. It was a century-long test of human grit. But when the hoist finally went silent in the early 2000s, a new danger emerged. The silence of the stories. Hi, I'm Levi Kessler, and this is History Below the Pines. And today we are going back down the shaft to tally the cost of a legacy. This is the price of gold. Today in our Storytellers collection, we are exploring the human heart of the Homestake mine. We are sitting down with Erin, the co-author of the vital new book, The Price of Gold. But before we get into our conversation with Erin, you have to understand the sheer scale of the Homestake. It survived the Great Depression, outlasted the gold mine shutdowns of World War II, and produced 41 million ounces of gold. But when the pumps were turned off and the lower levels began to flood, a century of culture was at risk of being submerged forever. Erin and her co-author have stepped in to serve as the final shift for these stories, capturing the raw, oral histories of the miners themselves. Let's jump into our conversation with Erin as she explains what it truly means to pay the price of gold. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here.
So, you are one of the authors, correct, of the book that we call, The Price of Gold, but I would say it's more than the price of gold. It's more about the history, the ongoing stories from the Homestake gold mine. But for those out there listening, the book is called The Price of Gold, Stories from the Homestake Gold Mine. And we will just start out with the first question. What made you want to write this book? Where did you come up with the idea to put the stories onto pages?
Right. Well, as you said, I'm one of the co-creators. I primarily did the writing and editing of stories. My other co-creator is Nick Hubbard, who's a fantastic award-winning photographer with company Frontier Creative in Rapid City. And we initially we met in college, but we both started working at the Sanford Underground Research Facility in Leeds, South Dakota. Um, Myself in 2018 and him in 2019. I was working as a science writer and he was working as a photographer. And as many people will know, that research facility is located in the former Homestake gold mine. We came on the scene in a really incredible time where the science was taking off, and we still had a lot of folks who had formerly worked at the Homestake gold mine and had come back to, after the gold mine had closed, to help reopen. And their incredible institutional knowledge helped reopen that underground space and helped that happen safely with a lot of expertise and all of the equipment and machinery and shafts and drifts. And a lot of those folks were still there working alongside us, but they were also getting toward retirement age. And I really loved hearing all of their stories. And I knew that that space was going to stop hearing those stories as people retired. And so Nick and I thought, let's do a small project. Let's interview, 8 to 10 people take their photo, preserve their stories, and it really snowballed. We interviewed a couple dozen folks and went from, a temporary art exhibit to now a coffee table book. And yeah, um, we're so pleased with it. It came out earlier this year, and we've just really had a lot of love and community come around this book and celebrate the book and the folks who are in it. So that is my long-winded answer to the to how the idea came about. It's all rooted in our work at the lab and our friendships and relationships with folks who used to work at Homestake.
That is awesome. And I think it's really neat. Before we started the podcast, Erin and I were chatting about how both of our projects kind of intertwine. We both have to do with history. I can speak for History Below the Pines. We started out as visiting a gold mine that was abandoned here in the Black Hills, and we said we're just going to tell the history on this mine and put it out there. It'll be kind of fun, and it snowballed. And here we are, almost 6 years later, with almost 12,000 followers and reaching 5.6 million people in the past year alone. So it's kind of fun. Snowball is a
Yeah.
common thing with history, I think. Well,
I think once you start pulling that thread, it's hard to pull back. So it's really
I
cool to see the
fully
growth.
I fully agree. So you didn't just talk to the miners. I noticed in the book that you talked to all the staff, regardless of if they were mining or if they worked above ground. What would you say was the most interesting job that you heard of, or that you learned
Mm.
about through your interviews?
That is a great question. Yeah, that was definitely a purposeful choice. I think when you think of a mine, you think of the miners, the folks who are at the face breaking rock and doing that extremely hard labor. And we talked to a lot of miners, and those were incredible stories. It was such a tough environment to work in a lot of ways, very dangerous. But they really watched out for each other and really took care of each other, which was just so incredible to hear. But you're right, we spoke to people who, worked in the shafts. We spoke to people who did maintenance throughout the underground. And then a lot of top level folks, as they refer to themselves, people who worked on the surface doing reception work, people who worked in like health and safety, folks who helped process the rock afterward to, turn it into the gold and the silver. I think one of the more interesting roles was a pair of scientists, Jim and Carson with Whitlock, who are married now. But they worked in the metallurgy department and worked on kind of perfecting the chemical processes of separating the rock from the precious metals that they wanted to get. And of course, I'm a science writer, so that kind of stuff was really interesting to me. And one of my favorite stories that came out of that conversation was a story about how Homestake was dumping a lot of toxic chemicals into Gold Run Creek in Lead. And it was really turning the creek into this very putrid environment and mostly cyanide and ammonia. And they were facing threats for closing the mine because of this, but they couldn't figure out like a chemical way to treat the water. And it was the work of Jim and Carson and their co-scientist Terry Mutter who discovered a biological life form that could actually treat these chemicals and clean up the mine. And they took that special of life form to mines all around the world and helped people clean up some of their ecological processes. So that was a science story that was, buried in all of this work, and I loved discovering that. So yeah, truly, we tried to speak to, people representative of all of the different jobs at Homestake.
That's super neat. Yeah, there's a job for everyone. I feel like, people hear the Homestake mine and we assume that they just mean the miners, but there was HR, there was the maintenance, there was mine safety, mine rescue. There's guys who worked above, there's guys who plowed snow when it did snow.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
I guess a common question that we get when we talk about the homestake on our page is people are like, how deep did it go? It went to the 8,000 foot level, correct?
8,000 feet was the deepest level.
Okay, yeah. But currently they are at the 4,850 level.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, the 4850 level had always been like a major thoroughfare of the underground. It was as deep as the two main shafts went, and it was a transition point for folks to get off and get to other shafts and go even further down. So it was always kind of a central location within the mine. And now for science, it's as deep as the scientists need to go to host their like sensitive science experiments. I think there is some interest in going deeper in the future, but that would be a major undertaking and is maybe a little bit further out in their future.
I imagine the overhaul and the production time and budget would have to significantly increase for that.
Yeah, one of the photos that I love, one of my favorite interviews was with Woody Hover, who at the time was a safety specialist at the lab. He took us on a tour of some spaces within the 4850 level, and this is a photo from that tour. This is in the book, along with a lot of other photos from that tour. This is the Four Winds hoist room. So obviously it's not in operation, hasn't been in operation since 2000. And as you can see, it was underwater, which caused a lot of it to rust. And so this is what they would be dealing with if they wanted to reopen the underground. It would be a pretty big undertaking. And I want to highlight, there's a lot of photos of the like this in the book. Um, and it does not capture the incredible cutting edge science spaces that are underground. If you want to see the contrast, I would go to Sanford Lab's website and see just like how crazy it is that both of these, this room and clean rooms exist on the same level. It boggles my mind. But yeah, so this is what we're dealing with when you talk about like going deeper and rehabilitating the the mine.
Interesting. That is super interesting. It's neat to think that there's a time capsule of history that sits below the 4,850 level.
Yeah. A lot of it underwater has been underwater since the early 2000s. This room was underwater and we were finding all kinds of things, books that people had left. I'm not sure if they should have been reading on shift, but there were quite a few mystery novels down there that had been pretty water damaged, but had somehow withstood the test of time.
Interesting. So when you were interviewing the miners, did you ever ask the question, what was it like to work, you know, thousands of feet underground every day? Like, what was their answer?
Yeah, I really did try to get at that because it's a type of work that is beyond me. Um, they did enjoy talking about it. I think the themes that came up were backbreaking, just incredibly intense labor. Even as it became more mechanized, it was a lot of heavy lifting and um, so, they emphasized that it was difficult. They also emphasized the environment was difficult. We talk about the 8,000 foot level where there's very little ventilation, and they had to bring in these ginormous refrigeration units to try and keep the temperature down. If you touch the wall, it's 130 degrees down there. And so, just working overtime to try and cool those spaces so that they could work. One guy joked that he lost 30 pounds in his first 2 weeks. I'm not sure if that's true, but just like sweating off all of that weight constantly. Um, and also, again, the danger. A lot of folks um, lost friends and colleagues in in the mine, people that they worked alongside, people in the same caverns that, they had worked in 2 weeks before, and then 2 weeks later, it collapses with someone else in there. And so there was a lot of talk about the danger and knowing that danger and taking steps to take care of each other. MSHA was created, I want to say, in the 70s. with an eye toward protecting minors. But even before that, they talked about the different things they would do to take care of each other and watch out for each other. And I found that really heartening.
Yeah, I suppose there's a lot of positive and negatives when it comes to the mining history down there. And
Hmm.
that leads me right into the next question. Someone actually had posted a comment on our section about your book, which lots of positive reviews, by the way. One of the comments was, "Well, the book cover those who passed away at the mine and tell their stories?"
Yeah, we tried to tell those stories when appropriate. Yeah, there was quite a few. One story that really stuck with me was Pam Millard talked about her husband coming home late from the mine and her being very concerned because when your husband doesn't come home on time, you know something's wrong. Um, Her husband did come home, but he let her know as part of mine rescue that he had to remove a body from the mine that day, and that's why it took him so long. And he told her that it was their neighbor. And so she watched as the folks from Homestake came and knocked on their neighbor's door and told them. And she just talked about how the community came around that family and supported that family, and just the heartbreaking nature of that. And a lot of folks we talked to spoke about losing fathers and brothers and coworkers, and we tried to approach those stories with a lot of care because they can be quite disturbing deaths. It's not a gentle, it's never a gentle way to go. And so we tried to approach it with a lot of care, knowing that family members would be reading those stories and kind of knowing the person that we were talking about. So we wanted to really respect that, but also capture the fact that it happened because it did happen, and it was a huge part of living there and working there, as you knew that that was a risk you were going to take. So yeah, we do tell those stories, and we do try to do that with a lot of tenderness.
Yeah, which I fully respect and thank you for that.
Yeah.
I think it's very interesting if you do research, and even if you do a simple Google search and you type in like mining cave-ins Black Hills, nothing
Mhm.
really comes up. And we
Mhm.
know that there's tons of cave-ins over the years, like in the 1800s and 1900s. And if you go to the archives, if you go to the state archives, there's a whole file on mining cave-ins, but you won't find that out in the public domain or, access to the public. And it's a little bit sad because these are stories, these are people's history, these are people's day-to-day jobs and people's legacies that are not being told. So thank you for doing this. It's much appreciated.
Yeah.
So on a more positive note, in the book, there were some stories that you talked about, pranks and some fun little stories like that. It was a hoot. I love the story about the bear in the locker. Um,
Yeah.
did you hear any other fun stories like that?
Yeah. I one of my favorite interviews was with two guys. We usually interviewed folks one-on-one, but in this situation, we had them together, and man, they wound each other up trying to remember everything that happened. And I'll be honest, a lot of times when you're talking about pranks, there were quite a few that were unpublishable. These guys were outrageous and unhinged. But we did try to push the envelope a little bit and share the ones that we could. Um, you know, they often described it as a way of relieving the tension. We just talked about how dangerous and intense the work is, but you can't carry that weight with you throughout the entire day, day after day after day. And so I think the way that they needled each other was their way of keeping each other human. Yeah, I think the bear in the locker room is a good one. There was a lot of jump scares and a lot of hiding and like jumping into the cart as it went by. There was once a devil's mask that someone put on, and I'm pretty sure he got a black eye and a lot of bruises that came out of that. Uh, the miners became very jumpy and very easily scarable. So I can't recount them word for word, but I will say that I will tease that there was a lot of creativity happening as far as pranks went deep underground.
Yeah, I think it's kind of fun. We've spoke to a lot of different homestake miners, and I always ask the question, I'm like, what was it like to work underground? And what was your favorite part about mining the homestake? And they all answered, 90% answered with the same line, which was the brotherhood, the mining brotherhood.
Hmm. Yeah.
So I feel like they really connected underground because they were really, I mean, they were stuck underground together per se. And that's what they did for numerous hours on end. So
Yeah.
I think it's kind of they grew up, you could say they grew up with each other. A lot of these miners were young men who worked there their entire lives.
Hmm.
So another question I have is we've talked about the seriousness, the positives, the negatives. But was there one person that you interviewed whose story really stuck out to you?
Mm. Yeah. I mean, genuinely, I have come to think of all of them as family because I've spoken to them so much over the years. I think one that continues to stick out to me is the story of Eileen Brosnahan, who had a lot of different jobs at the mine, but one of the longer ones was working in HR. And she unfortunately worked in HR in the last decade of the mine, and it was her role to lay off hundreds of folks who worked at Homestake as they were closing. They closed in 2001, and it was a long, slow closure. Um, she talked about having to sit across the table from friends and neighbors and deliver that news and just um, see the kind of anguish that washed over them because everybody thought, Homestake had been there for 125 years. It would be there forever. It was generations and generations of workers. Oftentimes, she was telling someone was from a family of three generations of workers that this was their last day. And so she just talked about really the devastation of having to do that, and she called it her darkest time. Um, there was a light at the end of the tunnel, no pun intended, when she was able to transfer to the Sanford Underground Research Facility and begin hiring people again, and begin bringing people back into that space. And she hired me on in 2018. So it was really incredible to see that. Growth and rebirth cycle. But yeah, her story really stuck with me because I think it was really representative of what a rift the closure was for the community and how many lives were really forever changed by that closure.
Yeah, I guess you could say her job came full circle in the
Yeah,
end there.
yeah.
What was the goal of this book? You guys wrote this book. There's always a goal to the project. What would you say is your goal?
Yeah, I think, and maybe we weren't always conscious of this as the project developed. It was initially a project, Nick's capstone at Black Hills State University, and then we had several art exhibits, and then eventually the book. So it definitely evolved over time. But I think that it's really encapsulated in the title, The Price of Gold. It's doing a lot of work there. That's the real question. We wanted to investigate what was the price that was paid to get this gold out of the ground. Obviously, Homestake was um, such a boon to the economy and created so many jobs and created this thriving community. But in the long arc of history, it also was a major reason for the displacement of Native American tribes in the Black Hills. it at least 400 people passed away from the very early beginnings of Homestake until its closure. And a lot of people gave a lot of their time and their life to it. And so, what is that price and was it worth it? And I think everyone will come away with their own answer for that. Um, the name is also a reference to the fact that a lot of people blame the closure of Homestake on the price of gold lowering so much at the end of the 20th century, and it was an off refrain. What's the price of gold? What's the price of gold? Can we remain open? Which is also debated in the community about whether or not that was the true cause of closure. So, not here to make any statements. I think a lot of it is up for interpretation, but I think truly that the question that we were trying to get at is captured in the title.
Yeah, I think that's a common question, and that's a wonderful answer. That's a common question I think people often bring up to us at History Below the Pines as well. Is do you think
Mm.
Homestake regrets closing, or why do you think they really closed? Is there something on the back end that caused them to close that they don't talk about? And day after day, I always go back to there's no conspiracy theory. They closed for a reason. But look at it now. It's one of the most successful underground science labs in America, correct?
Yeah, it's the deepest underground lab and the main one for hosting underground science. It's hosting the United States flagship particle physics experiment called the Deep Underground Neutrino Experiment, or DUNE. It was a massive construction project. I know that your audience is very interested in underground spaces. Highly encourage them to look at the photos of the excavation. I'm sure you've seen them. It's mind-boggling how big a space they've created deep underground. And it's all for science and to better understand neutrinos and our place in this world. And very exciting stuff. And it's great to see this underground space get a second life for science.
Yeah, I recently spoke to a miner who worked there, I believe he said for 14 years, and he said it's good that my home is being used once again.
Mm.
And that felt very real to me and very emotional that the way he made the statement, it was very respectfully done. Because I've also talked to miners who, were saying it should still be open. It should have stayed. It should have never closed. But to see and chat with this miner and hear that this miner was okay with his home now being used as a science lab, it's a full circle emotional statement. And I thought it was very neat and very emotionally done.
Yeah.
So one of the last questions, if you could go back in time to one of Homestake's busiest days, what would you want to see?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. I'd want to see it all. I want the full tour, man. I have heard so much about these spaces that are no longer accessible or buildings that have been taken down. So, yeah, give me the full tour. Take me to the 8,000 foot level for 5 minutes. I know I can't stand the heat, but I want to see it and I want to see the work being done. Um, and yeah, take me to the gold refinery. I want to hold a gold bar. I think that would be pretty incredible. Oh gosh, that would be incredible. It seems like an imaginary place in my mind because I have only heard stories, but man, that would be an incredible experience.
Yeah, I think it would be really neat to take a walk through one of the mills, like the
Yeah.
Star Mill, or just to be able to walk through and see everything and see the men working. I mean, you imagine how loud those mills were back in the day and the stamps
Hmm.
and the cages coming up and down. I mean, you see the cages still, but it was a different kind of energy. Um, I think it was
Yeah, they
very,
were they were very cramped. They really stuffed everyone on those cages, so it'd be tight, but it'd be a good experience.
yeah, I think it's super fun. And, for those listening out there, who are with Surf, we would love to, come tour the facility. Maybe, wink, wink. We're here.
Gotta shoot your shot.
But thank you so much, Erin, for coming onto the podcast and giving us some insight into the history of the homestake and the price of gold. The book is for sale. Where can folks get it?
Yeah, so we have retailers around the Black Hills region. That list is constantly being updated on our website. So I would encourage you to go to our website, thepriceofgoldbook.com, and you can either see the retailer list or you can buy it directly on our site.
Awesome. Yeah, it makes a great gift or a great read. If you're interested in mining history and Black Hills history, Homestake history, go get yourself a copy of The Price of Gold. You won't regret it.
Thanks, Levi. I really
Thank you so
appreciate
much,
it.
Erin, and hope to talk soon.
Thanks.
Talking with Erin, you realize that while the gold may be gone, the iron remains. It's in the resilience of the families in the lead, and it's in the pages of this book. Today, the head frames still stand like sentinels over the northern Black Hills, while the Sanford lab now uses those deep levels to search for dark matter and the secrets of the universe. We must never forget the generation that cleared the path with sweat and black powder. The price of gold is a ledger of our heritage, a reminder that the most valuable thing ever pulled out of the Black Hills wasn't the ore, but the character of the people who went down to get it. To everyone listening, pick up a copy of the book, walk the streets of Lead, and listen to the wind coming off the open cut. The history is there, right below your feet. I'm Levi Kessler. Keep on researching history, and we'll see you next time. This has been another production of History Below the Pines Storytellers Collection. A very special thank you to our guest Erin for her dedication to preserving the voices of the Homestake. Her book, The Price of Gold, is available now at local bookstores and online. For more stories, photos, and deep dives into history that shaped our state and our home, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, X, Threads, TikTok, and YouTube, all at the same title, History Below the Pines. If you have a story that needs to be told or a piece of history hidden on your land, reach out to us through our various social media platforms. We would love to help you. Thank you for listening, and we will see you right back here next week for another episode of the Storytellers Collection by History Below the Pines.